Hello, welcome to the Self-Learning Podcast by Dr. Sushma Singh. Let us start discussion on Chapter 5, Doing Sociology Research Methods. Have you ever wondered why a subject like sociology is called a social science more than any other discipline? Sociology deals with things that are already familiar to most people. All of us live in society and we already know a lot about the subject matter of sociology. Social groups, institutions, norms, relationships, and so on. Through our own experience, it seems fair then to ask what makes the sociologist different from other members of society. Why should he or she be called a social scientist? As with all scientific disciplines, the crucial element here is method or the procedures through which knowledge is gathered. For in the final analysis, sociologists can claim to be different from laypersons not because of how much they know or what they know, but because of how they acquire their knowledge. This is one reason for the special importance of method in sociology. As you have seen in the previous chapter, sociology is deeply interested in the lived experience of people. For example, when studying social phenomena like friendship or religion or bargaining in markets, the sociologist wants to know not only what is observable by the bystander, but also the opinions and feelings of the people involved. Sociologists try to adopt the point of view of people they study to see the world through their eyes. What does friendship mean to people in different cultures? What does a religious person think he or she is doing when performing a particular ritual? How does shopkeeper and customer interpret each other's word and gestures while bargaining for a better price? The answers to such questions are clearly part of the lived experience of actors involved, and they are of great interest to sociologists. This need to understand both the outsiders and the insiders' points of view is another reason why method is particularly important in sociology. Now let us move to the next point, some methodological issues. Although it is often used simply as a substitute for or synonymous of method, the word methodology actually refers to the study of method. Methodological issues or questions are thus about the general problems of scientific knowledge gathering that go beyond any one particular method, technique, or procedure. We begin by looking at the ways in which the sociologists try to produce knowledge that can claim to be scientific. Now let us move to the point objectivity and subjectivity in sociology. In everyday language, the word objective means unbiased, neutral, or based on facts alone. In order to be objective about something, we must ignore our own feelings or attitudes about that thing. On the other hand, the word subjective means something that is based on individual values and preferences. As you will have learned already, Every science is expected to be objective, to produce unbiased knowledge based solely on facts. But this is much harder to do in the social sciences than in the natural sciences. For example, when a geologist studies rocks or a botanist studies plants, they must be careful not to let their personal biases or preferences affect their work. They must report the facts as they are. They must not let their liking for a particular scientific theory or theorist influence the results of their research. However, the geologist and the botanist are not themselves part of the world they study, that is, the natural world of rocks or of the plants. By contrast, social scientists study the world in which they themselves live. The social world of human relations. This creates special problems for objectivity in a social science like sociology. First of all, there is the obvious problem of bias. Because sociologists are also members of society, they will also have all the normal likes and dislikes that people have. A sociologist studying family relations will herself be a member of a family, and her experiences are likely to influence her. Even when the sociologist has no direct personal experience of the group he or she is studying, there is still the possibility of being affected by the values and prejudices of one's own social context. For example, when studying a caste or religious community other than her own, the sociologist may be influenced by the attitudes about that community prevalent in her own past or present social environment. How do sociologists guard against these dangers? One method is to rigorously and continuously examine one's own ideas and feeling about the subject research. More generally, the sociologist tries to take an outsider's perspective on his or her own work. He or she tries to look at herself or himself and his or her research through the eyes of others. This technique is called self reflexivity or sometimes just reflexivity. The sociologist constantly subjects her own attitudes and opinions to self examination. She or he tries to consciously adopt the point of view of others, especially those who are the subjects of her research. One of the practical aspects of reflectivity is the importance of carefully documenting whatever one is doing. Part of the claims to superiority of research methods lies in the documentation of all procedures and the formal citing of all sources of evidence. This ensures that others can retrace steps we have taken to arrive at a particular conclusion and see for themselves if we are right. It also helps us to check and recheck our own thinking or line of argument. But however self reflexive the sociologist tries to be, there is always the possibility of unconscious bias. To deal with this possibility, sociologists explicitly mention those features of their own social background that might be relevant as a possible source of bias on the topic being researched. This alerts readers to the possibility of bias and allows them to mentally compensate for it when reading the research study. Another problem with objectivity in sociology is the fact that generally there are many versions of truth in the social world. Things look different from different vantage points, and so the social world typically involves many competing versions or interpretations of reality. For example, a shopkeeper and a customer may have very different ideas about what is a good price. A young person and an aged person may have very different notion of good food, and so on. There is no simple way of judging which particular interpretation is true or more correct, and often it is unhelpful to think in these terms. In fact, sociology tries not to judge in the way because it is really interested in what people think and why they think and what they think. A further complication arises from the presence of multiple points of view in the social sciences themselves. Like its sister social sciences, sociology too is a multi paradigmatic science. This means that the competing and mutually incompatible schools of thought coexist within the discipline. All this makes objectivity a very difficult and complicated thing in sociology. In fact, the old notion of objectivity is widely considered to be an outdated perspective. Social scientists no longer believe that the traditional notion of an objective, disinterested social science is attainable. In fact, such an idea can actually be misleading. This does not mean that there is no useful knowledge to be obtained via sociology or that objectivity is a useless concept. It means that objectivity has to be thought of as the goal of a continuous ongoing process rather than an already achieved end result. Now, let us wind up the session and thank you very much for engaging yourself with the Self Learning podcast.